Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We are in the kitchen making cheesy batter bread today. So we don't make a lot of batter breads. I really prefer a kneaded bread, but this one is a really good batter bread. So we're going to make it. It's cheesy batter bread, so it will be cheesy. Now the first thing we're going to add, this is 2.5 cups of flour, by the way. Just regular flour. You could do this with a whole wheat or with a rye. I wouldn't recommend it. It doesn't come out quite the same. So just your regular all-purpose flour or your bread flour if you are in the United States. To our 2.5 cups of bread flour, we are going to add 1/2 cup of melted butter. Yes, you can use margarine in this one. I'm using butter because that's what I use most of the time. But yes, you can use margarine. The defining flavor of this bread is the cheese. You won't notice if you use margarine instead. Next, we want 3 eggs. I crack them separately in a bowl for a couple reasons. One, you never know if there's something wrong with an egg. But 2, if you crack a bunch of shells, it's easier to get shells out of a little bowl than it is a big bowl. So 1 egg, we need 3 eggs. So that was 1. 2. And 3. And I know someone's going to ask me, those 3 eggs were different sizes. Yeah, that happens. I mean, they're not store-bought eggs. They're eggs from my chickens. So yeah, occasionally you're going to have eggs that are slightly different shapes and sizes. So I had one that was a torpedo, one that was almost round. It doesn't matter. Egg shapes are egg shapes. So after your 3 eggs, you're going to add 3/4 cup of milk. There we go. Mix that in. Because the batter bread, we're not going to knead it. We're going to mix it. So just mix that just a bit till it gets a little more consistent. Okay, now we're going to add a teaspoon of salt. I'm using Himalayan salt. Any salt works. Mix that in. Mix after each ingredient addition. There we go. We're using 2 teaspoons of sugar. Okay, yeah, that's a little less than we normally use, but this dough does not need a lot of sugar. It does need slightly longer rise time because of the little sugar in it, but that's fine. It's not a big deal. So that's our sugar. Next, we are going to add 1 heaping teaspoon of yeast. Now this should be quick rise yeast. Quick rise yeast works best in batter breads. If you're using traditional yeast, you should dissolve it in warm milk before you start. So you make sure you get all that yeast. You don't want it stuck on the sides of your bowl. Mix that in. Now, we want 1 cup of shredded cheese. I am using a marble cheese here, a farmer's cheese. It's very flavorful, but you can actually use any cheese you like. You could use old cheddar, anything. If you wanted to have a little bit of a kick to it, you could use a Tex-Mex cheese, whatever you like. Just any shredded cheese. Shred it, don't cube it. It is kind of important that this one is shredded. So we're going to just mix this now until it's consistent. It doesn't take very many passes. Remember, we're not kneading this. We don't really have to worry about that. We're just going to let the dough develop on its own. And see, already that's pretty much fine. You could add dill to this if you wanted. I'm not going to because I'm just doing a standard cheesy batter bread. So that's what it looks like. That's what it should look like. We're going to set this aside for an hour. You can cover it with a damp tea towel, or in my case, I'm just going to put it in my microwave. Keeps it away from the cats who do love cheese, and it keeps the humidity and temperature controlled. You're not going to turn your microwave on or anything. You're just going to happily leave this to rise. It's going to need at least an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So set a timer and go do something else because it does need time to rise. We'll come back and see how it's done. All right, so our batter bread has risen for the first time. So now we just gonna punch that air out. Just punch that air out a little bit, just like that. There we go. Now we want to set that aside for a minute. We want to prep our pan. I'm using silica, so it's pretty non-stick, so I only need a very light coating of my canola oil cooking spray. You can grease your pans however you want. If you're not using silica, remember that you're going to want to grease them very well, because if it's not non-stick, it's going to stick. All right, so then we're just going to take this dough and scrape it out of here. Hang on, I'm just going to get one of my spatulas because it's so much easier. If you use a rubber spatula, it becomes easier to get your dough out. I'm just going to scrape it off the wooden spoon first. There we go. This will be better. So rubber spatulas are amazing for scraping dough out. So if you have one, use one for your batter breads like this. So we're just going to pour it straight in here. Just push it over the edge. There's not a lot of technique to this. You just kind of shove it in. And then we're going to set this aside to rise for about 45 minutes. You want to keep an eye on it because this is a batter bread. If it comes too high over the edge of your dough, of your pan, what's going to happen is it's going to overflow before it even starts to bake. And that's not real helpful. So we're just going to push this into place, smooth the top, and then we're going to set it aside for about 45 minutes to rise. Once it's risen so that it touches the edge of my bread pan, I'll bring it out and start to bake it, because this flows, obviously, so it'll flow right over the edge and make a mess. So you want to make sure it doesn't overflow your pan. So set that aside about 45 minutes. Check it after 30 minutes. We'll come back and check it. All right, we are ready to bake our cheesy batter bread. You see how it's right up to the edges of my pan? If I let it start to spill over, it's going to start dripping. So when it's right up to the edges is when you want to start baking it, just because otherwise it just makes a mess and it ends up burned and it's just not good. So now is when I want to bake it. So you're going to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're going to bake this for 40 to 60 minutes. That seems like a big range, but it really could take 60 minutes. Usually I find about 45 to 50 minutes is the ideal, but ovens are a little bit different from each other, so prepare for it to take an hour if you need to. Check it at 40 minutes though. It should sound hollow when tapped when it is cooked, so check at 40 minutes, be prepared to leave it for 60 minutes. So we'll come back when it's cooked and I'll tell you exactly how long it took. All right, so our cheesy batter bread is finished. It just came out of the oven, so I'm going to burn my hands as I do this, but oh well. Ow. You can see it pulled away from the side of the pan, which is an indicator that it's done. And when I tap it, it does sound hollow. Now it just came out. You do want to remove it from the pan immediately. Ow, 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 ow. Yeah, very, very hot. So you want to remove it from the pan immediately. You want to let that cool about 10 minutes before you slice into it. It'll still be nice and warm, but it will have set. If I cut it right now, the crust is going to crumble. So you want to let it set at least 10 minutes and then dig in. Thanks for joining us today as we made cheesy batter bread. I hope you'll try this at home. It's a delicious bread that will please your whole family. Hopefully you will give it a shot. It's really easy. And hopefully you will join us again tomorrow. See you then.